The bombing of Dresden was a UK-US aerial bombing attack on the city of Dresden, the capital of the German state of Saxony, that took place during the Second World War in the European theatre. Germany would be forced to surrender 3 months later, in 4 raids between 13 and 15 February 1945. 722 heavy bombers of the British Royal Air Force and 527 of the United States Army Air Forces dropped more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs and incendiary devices on the city. The bombing and the resulting firestorm destroyed over 1,600 acres of the city center. An estimated 22,700 to 25,000 people were killed. 3 more USAAF air raids followed, 2 occurring on the 2nd of March aimed at the city's railroad marshalling yard and 1 small raid on the 17th of April aimed at industrial areas. Immediate German propaganda claims following the attacks and post-war discussions on whether the attacks were justified has led to the bombing becoming one of the moral causes célèbres of the war. A 1953 United States Air Force report defended the operation as the justified bombing of a military and industrial target, which they claimed was a major rail transport and communication center, housing 110 factories and 50,000 workers in support of the German war effort. Several researchers have asserted that not all of the communications infrastructure, such as the bridges, was targeted, nor were the extensive industrial areas outside the city center. Critics of the bombing argue that Dresden was a cultural landmark of little or no military significance, and that the attacks were indiscriminate area bombing and not proportionate to the commensurate military gains. Large variations in the claimed death toll have fueled the controversy. In March 1945, the German government ordered its press to publish a falsified casualty figure of 200,000 for the Dresden raids, and death toll estimates as high as 500,000 have been given. The city authorities at the time estimated no more than 25,000 victims, a figure that subsequent investigations, including a 2010 study commissioned by the City Council, support. Background. Early in 1945, after the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge had been exhausted, including the disastrous attack by the Luftwaffe on New Year's Day, involving elements of 11 combat wings of the Luftwaffe's Day Fighter Force, and after the Red Army had launched their Silesian offensives into pre-war German territory. The German army was retreating on all fronts, but still resisting strongly. On 8 February 1945, the Red Army crossed the Oder River, with positions just 70 kilometers from Berlin. As the eastern and western fronts were getting closer, the Western Allies started to consider how they might aid the Soviets with the use of the strategic bomber force. They planned to bomb Berlin and several other eastern cities in conjunction with the Soviet advance, to cause confusion among German troops and refugees, and hamper German reinforcement from the west. A special British Joint Intelligence Subcommittee report titled German Strategy and Capacity to Resist, prepared for Winston Churchill's eyes only, predicted that Germany might collapse as early as mid-April if the Soviets overran their eastern defenses. Alternatively, the report warned that the Germans might hold out until November if they could prevent the Soviets from taking Silesia. Hence any assistance provided to the Soviets on the Eastern Front could shorten the war. At the time of bombing, the Soviets were conducting their Lower Silesian offensive. Plans for a large and intense aerial bombing of Berlin and the other eastern cities had been discussed under the codename Operation Thunderclap in mid-1944, but it had been shelved on 16 August. These were now re-examined, and the decision made to draw up a more limited operation. On the 22nd of January, the RAF Director of Bomber Operations, Air Commodore Sidney Bluffton, sent a memo to the Deputy Chief of the Air Staff, Air Marshal Sir Norman Bottomley, suggesting that what appeared to be a coordinated air attack by the RAF to aid the current Soviet offensive would have a detrimental effect on German morale. On the 25th of January, the Joint Intelligence Committee supported the idea, as it tied in with the ultra-based intelligence that dozens of German divisions deployed in the West were moving to reinforce the Eastern Front, and that interdiction of these troop movements should be a high priority. Arthur Harris, AOC Bomber Command, was asked for his opinion, and proposed a simultaneous attack on Chemnitz, Leipzig and Dresden. That evening Churchill asked the Secretary of State for Air, Sir Archibald Sinclair, what plans had been drawn up to carry out these proposals. He passed on the request to Sir Charles Portal, the Chief of the Air Staff, who answered that we should use available effort in one big attack on Berlin and attacks on Dresden, Leipzig, and Chemnitz, or any other cities where a severe blitz will not only cause confusion in the evacuation from the east, but will also hamper the movement of troops from the west. He mentioned that aircraft diverted to such raids should not be taken away from the current primary tasks of destroying oil production facilities, jet aircraft factories, and submarine yards. Churchill was not satisfied with this answer and, on the 26th of January, pressed Sinclair for a plan of operations. "Pray report to me tomorrow what is going to be done." In response to Churchill's inquiry, Sinclair approached Bottomley, who asked Harris to undertake attacks on Berlin, Dresden, Leipzig, and Chemnitz as soon as moonlight and weather allowed, with the particular object of exploiting the confused conditions which are likely to exist in the above-mentioned cities during the successful Russian advance. This activity allowed Sinclair to inform Churchill on the 27th of January of their staff agreement, subject to the overriding claims on other targets under the point-blank directive. Strikes against communications in these cities to disrupt civilian evacuation from the east and troop movement from the west would be made. On the 31st of January, Bottomley sent a message to Portal saying a heavy attack on Dresden and other cities will cause great confusion in civilian evacuation from the east, and hamper movement of reinforcements from other fronts. British historian Frederick Taylor mentions a further memo sent to the Chiefs of Staff Committee by Sir Douglas Evil on the 1st of February, in which Evil states interfering with mass civilian movements was a major, even key, factor in the decision to bomb the city centre. Attacks there, where main rail junctions, telephone systems, city administration, and utilities were located, would result in chaos. Britain had learned this after the Coventry Blitz, when loss of this crucial infrastructure had longer-lasting effects than attacks on war plants. During the Yalta Conference on 4 February, the Deputy Chief of the Soviet General Staff, General Alexei Antonov, raised the issue of hampering the reinforcement of German troops from the Western Front by paralyzing the junctions of Berlin and Leipzig with aerial bombardment. In response, Portal, who was in Yalta, asked Bottomley to send him a list of objectives to discuss with the Soviets. Bottomley's list included oil plants, tank and aircraft factories, and the cities of Berlin and Dresden. A British interpreter later claimed that Antonov and Joseph Stalin asked for the bombing of Dresden, but there is no mention of these requests in the official record of the conference, and the claim may be Cold War propaganda. Military and industrial profile. Dresden was Germany's seventh largest city and, according to the RAF at the time, the largest remaining unbombed built-up area. Taylor writes that an official 1942 guide to the city described it as one of the foremost industrial locations of the Reich, and in 1944, the German Army High Command's Weapons Office listed 127 medium to large factories and workshops that were supplying the army with materiel. The contribution to the German war effort may not have been as significant as the planners thought. The U.S. Air Force Historical Division wrote a report in response to the international concern about the bombing, which was classified until December 1978. This said that there were 110 factories and 50,000 workers in the city supporting the German war effort at the time of the raid. According to the report, there were aircraft components factories, a poison gas factory, an anti-aircraft and field gun factory, an optical goods factory, as well as factories producing electrical and X-ray apparatus, gears and differentials, and electric gauges. It also said there were barracks, hutted camps, and a munitions storage depot. The USAF report also states that two of Dresden's traffic routes were of military importance: north-south from Germany to Czechoslovakia, and east-west along the Central European uplands. The city was at the junction of the Berlin-Prague-Vienna railway line, as well as the Munich-Breslau, and Hamburg-Leipzig lines. Colonel Harold E. Cook, a U.S. POW held in the Friedrichstadt marshalling yard the night before the attacks, later said that, "I saw with my own eyes that Dresden was an armed camp. Thousands of German troops, tanks and artillery and miles of freight cars loaded with supplies supporting and transporting German logistics towards the east to meet the Russians." An RAF memo issued to airmen on the night of the attack said, "Dresden, the seventh largest city in Germany and not much smaller than Manchester, is also the largest unbombed built-up area the enemy has got. In the midst of winter, with refugees pouring westward and troops to be rested, roofs are at a premium, not only to give shelter to workers, refugees, and troops alike, but to house the administrative services displaced from other areas." At one time well known for its china, Dresden has developed into an industrial city of first-class importance. The intentions of the attack are to hit the enemy where he will feel it most, behind an already partially collapsed front, and incidentally to show the Russians when they arrive what Bomber Command can do. In the raid, major industrial areas in the suburbs, which stretched for miles, were not targeted. According to Donald Miller, the economic disruption would have been far greater had Bomber Command targeted the suburban areas where most of Dresden's manufacturing might was concentrated.